What's up, bookworms? This is Megan coming at you with another Cantina conversation. Today's episode features a chat with Elaine Neil Orr. We're talking about her book, Dancing Woman. That book is available now. Elaine was such a pleasure to talk to. I found it so fascinating that she was actually spent years, a significant portion of her life, living as an expat in Africa, which definitely inspired the story of main characters in her book. But either way, I'll let you guys get to it. Here is Elaine. So today we've got Elaine Neil Orr. We're talking about her book, Dancing Woman. That book just came out this week. It's available now. Elaine, thank you so much for joining me today. I discussed it with you. I'm still reading this book. I'm enjoying it so far. I'm enjoying the characters and I'm sympathizing with Isabel. I am sympathizing with Nick. They are going through it and I'm digging the situation that you've got her in and the journey that she's on. And I'm excited to go a little bit deeper today.
Thanks so much, Megan. I'm really happy to be here. This is how we reach readers, and authors are so grateful when someone shows an interest in their book and wants to help get it out into the world.
Yeah,
You, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a fan of like most genres, and this one, I guess you could call it like, I don't know, contemporary or women's fiction or historical
you
fiction.
would think, yeah.
Yeah.
We're all
It's a versatile. Yeah, so it's got a little bit of everything, a little bit for everyone. So before we get started, can you go into a summary of the book so that listeners can follow along if they haven't picked it up yet?
sure. I can especially maybe give us the premise and what leads off. So, the protagonist, the main character, our main character is Isabel, and she grew up in Virginia, in Richmond, and felt always a little bit of an outsider. One thing she had was going for her was she wanted to be an artist, and she'd gotten pretty good at it. But then was discouraged in college when a professor made a really awful comment about her painting. And in the meanwhile, she's also met a very attractive man who's just a bit older, and he's going to go on this exotic quest to West Africa and be a part of this new, I think John Kennedy instituted USAID, like the Peace Corps. So he's going to go there as an agricultural engineer. And he asks her to marry him and go along. And she does. It's both kind of running away from disappointment and running toward what she hopes will be a grand adventure. When they arrive, of course, her husband's very busy with his work, and she's in Nigeria, among a largely Muslim population. And she doesn't know the first thing about what to do next, right? However, one admirable trait of that Isabel has is that she's curious and she takes risks, sometimes to greater risk, and she begins to explore on her own and take every opportunity to learn the culture. Not too far into the novel, she also has, I should say, early on a miscarriage, which is a great disappointment and leads to some depression. But as the novel begins, her husband's away doing his work. She goes to a party being held, being given by a women's league organization, and a Nigerian British musician. He's has a British mother, a Nigerian father, is performing, and she becomes enamored of him, and she has a one night stand with him. That's her a little bit over the top self who goes too far, too quickly. And this could upend her whole life. And I don't think that's a plot spoiler because it happens right away.
Hmm.
And everything moves out from there. He reawakens her desire to be an artist. And she goes home after that experience, and in a kind of flurry of activity in her backyard, the next day, she unearths an ancient sculpture, which is a dancing woman. So Isabel is the dancing woman because she dances at the party. She uncovers this knock. It's called an NOK, which is an actual work of art, historically accurate, 2,000 years old. And so that knock, which speaks to her, and Bobby Tunde, the musician, and her good husband are all drawing her in different directions.
Yeah. In a nutshell, I know there's a lot to unpack it. We'll get into that because there's so much going on there, like, just with with the situation that you have her in because which I think so many readers which I think so many readers could resonate with, at least especially probably women and more specifically grown women who have families or even like artists who might have had to like Isabel have had to step back from that part of themselves and step back from that passion and that the creative part of themselves and life happens, right? I can't count how many times and how common it is for women to have to put aside, especially in the early 60s, let alone over ever. Like pick a generation, and it happens to women a lot where they have to put their kind of their own dreams and ambitions aside for their to fulfill their role as a wife and a mother and kind of following in their spouse's footsteps into their dreams and ambitions and just to dial it up a notch where they're expats, right? So they're like she's in like totally opposite Virginia culture. Like, totally opposite of what she's used to, and especially where it seems from my perspective anyway, like I didn't live in the 60s, but where they have even more like restrictions and for women and gender roles. They have more specific like restrictions of the child marriage comes up. The women aren't allowed to drive or like women they don't typically drive or it's not appropriate for women to walk about on their own. And so yeah, things like that where it's a little bit of a culture shock and she's on her own aside from their house servant, their manservant Daniel. And she's yeah, like she's in this position where it's just not only is she unfortunately have to fulfill that traditional role, but she's like thousands of miles away from everything she knows. And then, like you said, she explores a little bit too far and but she's grappling with that pretty much like the whole time. Like she's just blaming herself and the guilt is just always there and she's thinking that everything is a punishment, everything that happens is a potential punishment for
Yeah,
her infidelity.
right.
It's yeah, and so it's I'm not condoning cheating whatsoever, but I just you put her in a position or you create a character where you can't, at least for me, you can't help but like understand what she's dealing with. You understand how she can get away from herself a little bit.
Right, exactly. I think in the 60s, certainly. This is early 60s, right? This is Kennedy's just been elected. I don't even know what kind of birth control was available. I don't think the pill was, we didn't have the pill then. So
Mhm.
there was so much constriction and a lot of that changed in the course of the 60s with the women's movement. But the idea that a woman could be a fulfilled artist and a mother and a wife, or at least a good mother and a good wife, right,
Mhm.
was almost unheard of. It wasn't really until the 60s with feminist criticism that we began to have women writers even in being taught in college, or really the 70s,
Yeah.
right, along with then some black writers like Toni Morrison, and we began to get women writers like that. So she's definitely of her age, but as you say, I'm not sure that much has changed. We have birth control, but that's a little bit under erasure. Um,
Yeah.
and abortion is talk about contemporary issues, right? And what women are going to be able to do and how they're going to live their
Yeah.
lives. So I think it's timely, even though it's an historical novel. I don't think I realized how
Yeah.
timely it would be when I started writing it 4 years ago. But it seems to me it could be almost any time, and that men don't really
Yeah.
have to choose between being an artist or having a career they find great joy in and also having children. Right. And
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
I can I it's right there. Like I with own my own except like my own self and as an example. I went to college. I was very fortunate where I grew up in a middle class family, and I didn't if we did struggle, I never knew. I think my
Right.
mom was laid off for a hot second, like a few years, but my I never really noticed that we struggled. I think my it was I think I know we did, but I didn't know at the time.
Right.
So that even that's gonna speak to how fortunate, and I'm grateful for it too. And then my husband, he's an engineer. So he got into science and math, so he was going to have a very well off job as soon as he found one, and he's been working with the same company for 14
Oh,
years.
okay.
And so yeah, and he loves what he does, and I'm a little bit jealous cuz he's engaged, he likes the people he works with, and he's paid well, and I feel like that's almost like a trifecta. So it's very but I was always really career driven. I always saw myself as a working person
Mhm.
first. I never really thought I'd become a mom. And then once I became a mom, I was lucky that my job was flexible where I was able to, even before the pandemic, I was able to work from home part time.
Okay.
Um, but at the same time, I also noticed that my responsibilities and my role was a little bit split. Like I couldn't go all 100% in on my career. Any motivation or kind of momentum that I had was definitely stalled because I was the default parent. I'm still the default parent. My kids are 4 and 7
Oh,
now,
wow.
and I yeah, and, like, they're getting in school, like, my kid's in 2nd grade and preschool, so they're getting there. I'm waiting for that sweet spot where I get that free most of that free time back, especially with the 4-year-old. But it's I wouldn't necessarily trade it because 'cause we're still good, like, I still have my career. I guess it's just look at it as, "Oh, where would I have ended up? Where would I be if I didn't have kids or if I had kids a few years later?" It's one of those things that, like, why I sympathize with Isabel so much is because even though it wasn't like I'm not in a creative field, I wasn't, like, an artist or whatever like her, like, I work in marketing, and there's still
Yeah.
creativity, but it's there's they're like, I could work, like, almost anywhere, which I appreciate. But it's yeah, I could totally but you're absolutely right. There's so many parallels from not only gender roles, but like how administrations and laws can change. And they're still like, it's so stupid how we're still like fighting so many of the same battles. Like years later, oh, gross. Is it? Wait, 60s? Let me do the math 60 years later. So, but, yeah, but still, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
gross or anybody else's gross, but it's like, oh, I just remind myself, like, oh no, it's not 2000 anymore. It's 2025.
exactly. I know. I
Yeah,
know. We're
yeah,
a
yeah.
quarter of the way through this century, right?
That's
Um,
crazy.
so picking up what you were saying about your career, and that you were saying it wasn't necessarily a creative career, but the thing is, when you can focus on something entirely, you can get into a zone. There's
Yes.
a kind of joy in what you're making, whether it's relationships or whether it's teaching or whether it's marketing. You're putting a plan together and you're making something happen, and that is creative.
Yeah.
And you're using your connections, and I think there's kind of joy and just a kind of, I don't know exactly the right word, but a sense of kind of living outside of time, like when you're working and you're just in the zone. Some
Yeah.
people feel this way working out, like athletically, running. What but I think people we need to have that kind of time to do best what we do best. We need
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
time with children too, right? It's not like we
Oh,
don't need that
absolutely.
with children. It's just that women have been either having to do one and not the other, or do both and not quite have enough time really for that more creative, expressive part that also
Yeah.
brings more public recognition.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely.
Like you said,
Absolutely.
monetary reward. I'm not gonna make a lot of
Yeah.
money on my book, okay? I'm not gonna be a bestseller. I'm also a college professor, which happens to be a good job for writing because you
Yeah.
teach
What do you teach
I
then?
teach literature. American
Okay, there you go. You just couldn't you had to get your outlet. No, but that's, like, still great, like, how I do this podcast and reading stuff and, like, the reviews and stuff. You find a way to do something outside of your normal obligations, like, that tie into your career. This is, like, you and your little baby, just like this is me and my little
right,
baby. So, no, I think it's so important because that touches on another thing where Isabel's still trying to find a way or she's her experiences, like you said with, Bobby, he's kind of bringing that out in her, but then she's at war with herself because she's like being pulled in different directions, and
Right.
part of her that she's being called to. And then there's this handsome, charming musician who is feeding that other part of her that he's scratching that itch, or he's helping her to scratch that itch. He's like guiding her hand, like, here, scratch that itch, kind of thing.
Right.
And
Right.
it's just, yeah, it was almost like I see Dancing Woman as like an acknowledgement, a wink, a little love letter to women in almost all generations of like, time and time again, we have to make the choices. And yeah, I think in today's world, it's a little more common, or it's a little more, there's a more open conversation about the working mom. But then there's still, like you said, there's kind of other things like being challenged, where that it's because of that. Like, it's because we're seeing trends, and then certain people in power don't want that to continue, or they want to bring back some of those some of those other like lifestyle patterns. And we don't have to get too political, we don't have to get on too many tangents, but with stuff like historical fiction, and when you talk about these themes, it's hard not to relate and notice the commonalities, like, of what today's generations are dealing with. And and it's like, I don't even, part of me is, I tell parents, like, new parents, the only unsolicited advice is to take one day at a time.
Yeah.
Like, it's when that's how I feel, because hopefully I don't think this is too spoilery, but Isabel does end up being a mother. If it hasn't been alluded to yet in our conversation, and then so she's obviously, she's grateful for it and she's happy about it, but then with the situation that her husband finds himself in, and then she's left on her own for a hot second. And I don't know, you threw it all at her. You had to kick it up a notch a few times. It was just like, you're like, no, I'm gonna dial it up a little bit. I'm gonna throw this at her. I'm gonna throw this at her. I'm gonna throw this at her. She's not just like a normal finds herself pregnant in this situation where she was unfaithful. And you had me for a second there too. I was worried. I was like, I didn't know what was going to happen. And as the story was progressing, I'm like, oh, okay. Cause I think that also could be just, that's another layer to that readers can also relate to, is if they found that some themselves of a loved one who just unexpected happens, and
Right.
then they're not prepared for it. And
Right.
because it does change everything, even the aftermath of it. It changes just how do you go, like, moving forward and stuff like that. Hopping off a little bit off of what you were saying, I'm curious about the research, because like, if you're in academia, you're used to like gathering up your resources, doing your research, either lesson planning or how you're gonna talk about the literature, things like that. You're used to having to dig up all on that. Did you approach, like, how did your like normal career prepare you for this project? How did you approach the research? Because there's a lot, because it's historical fiction, you want to get things correctly.
Right.
And then, was there anything fascinating or like surprising that you learned, stuff like that?
Quite a bit, but here's something you may not know, and certainly the listeners won't know yet unless they've already picked up the book. But I was born and grew up in Nigeria.
Mm,
So my parents were expats. And I was
okay.
growing up, but I grew up in the southern part of the country, which you might compare to
How long did you live there then? How long did
till I
you
was
grow up there?
16.
So that's a long time. Okay, so did you grow up with, I imagine you picked up a lot of the language, or did you have an accent? I'm so curious about that.
Well, you can hear my accent, but did I have a different one? No. So, unfortunately, and for many reasons, I did not learn a Nigerian language. There are like at least 300.
Oh god, I
Okay.
think I knew that. I think I knew there was a
There are a
lot.
lot.
I think I
Now,
knew there
there
was a
are
lot.
dominant
Yes.
ones. And in the novel, Isabel does begin to learn Hausa. She learns quite a bit, actually, by the time you get to the end, so that she can have a
Yeah.
conversation with the chief of the town, who's called the Sarki, and with some of the women she befriends or who befriend her.
Mhm.
But I did grow up in Nigeria, but I was in the southern part of the country, which is largely Christian. The
Okay.
northern part of the country, which is where this novel is set, is largely Muslim. So that's where I learned a lot.
Okay.
Okay, I didn't really know much about Ramadan. I didn't know about children going door to door and getting candies. I didn't know about goats being slaughtered, run through the street, and then having their necks slit and the blood running out in the street. So those are things I learned. I didn't know much about planting a forest of trees, some of the engineering things. I did already know about the war because there's a civil war that breaks out. It's about to break out in
Yeah.
the country at the end of the novel. I knew that because I lived there then. I was there during that war. But I've written a memoir about growing up in Nigeria called Gods of Noonday, a white girl's life.
Love that title.
Yeah,
Because you're embracing it, you're owning it. This is my experience as a, yeah, exactly.
yeah. But being a white American girl, grew up I grew up both as a Nigerian.
Yes. Yeah. Why did you, was there a reason? Oh, because when you came, you were in Georgia, you were in the South. Because I was curious why you had Isabel from
Yeah,
Virginia.
I was just trying to stretch my, I don't know, my representation. I wrote a novel about characters in Georgia. My primary characters were from Georgia. And then I wrote a novel where the primary characters were from North Carolina. I guess I'm going north. I don't know. So then I went to Virginia. I thought I still wanted the novel to be potentially classified as Southern. So I didn't want to have them from Chicago plus I don't know anything about basically.
Any of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Insofar as I'm an American, I'm a Southerner because I've always lived in the American South. And I think Richmond's a fascinating city, and I'd been there. And when I learned about the working class background that I could give her and situate her there in downtown Richmond, that excited me. And it just seemed, yeah, Tennessee didn't seem quite right. I don't know. Yeah.
I know. I was just curious because, like, a lot of authors, they'll draw upon what they're familiar with, and so I just was curious as, oh, why Virginia or whatever, because but it was still like no matter where, still it's gonna be different. It's gonna be significantly, drastically different than growing up in Nigeria, another country across the sea. Yeah, but I just get curious because I've only driven through the South, and we did take a vacation in Myrtle Beach, but that's the only experiences that we have. But I just remember, oh, and then we went to, I've been in Nashville because my brother-in-law and his wife lived there. But there was one thing, oh, Gatlinburg for the smokes my
Oh,
husband and I
yeah.
did spend, and I loved it. But I was also like, when we went to Gatlinburg, some of the shops were still selling Confederate flags, and I'm like, are you serious?
I know. That's,
But that was also, like, very telling for
yeah.
me. Oh, because 'cause I'm like, "Okay, I grew up in Chicago, it's so mixed, and we're also it's so populated with, diverse backgrounds," and but then it's you just travel, what, like, maybe 1,000, few hundred miles, and it's just there are people still down there. It's just I think I was speaking to an author who she was saying the same sentiment, but it's because she was Indian, and her parents were from India, and then she went inside the store owned by Indian people, and they were selling Confederate flags, and she was like, what the fuck?" But then it was just like them kind of catering to the locals, and it's I just think it was like it's like I don't know. My opinion is, like, they're not bothered at being called racist, or they don't like to admit loss, or at least as far as I'm familiar with the history of it. But I'm just like, I don't it was just like, it's so surprising to me. I'm like, I'm get over it. There's so many more serious things to worry about than racism in itself as a whole thing. It's I That's why I think I was so fascinated by your background of how you differentiate and how different it is for Nigerians to come here, and it's a shock for them to realize, "Oh, I'm just seen as black. I'm not seen as Nigerian." But then when you come here, you're seen as American, even though you go there, you go back, and you're like, "Oh, welcome home. You're Nigerian." Wait, did you have to get another citizenship when you came here, or were you
Um,
already dual citizenship because of your
because my
parents?
parents, yeah, I
Yeah.
was
Okay. Yeah.
automatically an American.
Okay. God, it's so fascinating. I don't know. I'm like picking your life. I'm like picking your brain, picking your life.
Oh,
I want to be respectful of our time. I'm just going to ask a few more questions. Thank you for letting me bombard you about your experiences and how it contributed to this book. So, okay, what were the most challenging parts to write? What were the most enjoyable parts to write?
oh, let's see. Oh man, that's hard. One thing that was challenging was writing all the painting scenes because I go to real lengths in the novel to describe how she does watercolor. Watercolor
Yeah,
is a very specific craft. It's not like just putting a
it's
pigment
hard.
on a canvas and then you can change it or move it or paint over it or whatever. It's very demanding. It's like using ink. You put it down and you can't get it up and you can't paint over,
Yeah,
and you can build up with washes, but I wanted it to be extremely authentic, and I wanted us to take her seriously as an artist and to see that she has the vocabulary for the craft. She
yeah.
wouldn't think, "Oh, I'm just going to put some brown here." She would think, "I'm going to use some burnt umber." So I had to hire someone who did watercolor. I have done some watercolor, but I had to hire
I was
someone.
gonna say you're a brave woman. Like I have never done watercolor. I don't even want to touch it. My mom has because she's retired, so she was like taking a couple classes.
It's
And
very
I'm like, I
hard.
can't.
It's very
It's
hard.
hard.
That was probably the hardest part. The easiest parts are describing landscape, atmosphere, weather. I just know that like I lived 10 lives there. I just know it. And I love to conjure it. It's an indulgence. So that's always makes me happy is to throw in the frangipani leaves and or the scent of the frangipani flower and the bougainvillea and the harmattan, which is when the dust comes down from the Sahara, or the sound of the rains, all of that. I can do that blindfolded.
I love because I that was one of my I think one of the definitely the one things I noticed was that, like, I don't know, like, lyrical, but, like, very nature, like, you a lot of descriptive based on the nature of it, so I could definitely tell that's where you felt
Yeah,
comfortable, of how you were describing your scenes and how Isabel was describing what she was seeing, her surroundings, and I thought that was yeah, there's definitely something there about helping the reader just immerse themselves in the more you gotta find that sweet spot, you gotta find that moment to just, like, click, and when it comes natural to you, when it's easy to you, it, like, it definitely shows versus when it's if you're struggling with it,
right.
that will also yeah. Yeah, it was like you say you were struggling with the watercolor parts, but I remember, like, when you were I know that I think I've heard that hands are extremely hard
Mhm.
to draw, and then when you had Isabel paint Amina, I think her name Amina's hands, she was like, "Oh, I just wanna paint your hands," and then I was like she was like, "Okay." And it was like she was hard to read. She was like, "Okay, like, I'll do it." But I thought that was such an intimate scene because not only 'cause I think I like, as a reader, I have a background understanding of how difficult it is, but also it was like you had to get in there. You had to get in there and use that language and use that moment to bring out, just as you said, like, the challenging parts of describing it
Yeah,
and describing her process and her motions and just, oh, the
right.
nails and making sure she got that right or letting parts dry before she started another part, and
Exactly.
that's yeah, like, I definitely caught that, and I definitely there were certain moments, like, that definitely was, like, zoned in. It was easy for me to zone in on it, and I definitely noticed it. But it helped, like, it slows the story down, but it also takes the reader into a place where they can just hone in on it. Like, they can just appreciate it if that's what they're looking for, and it's just I just remember from my experience, I was just, like, just getting into it, and I was
Well,
like it's hard for me to articulate because I was just like, "Oh, wait, she's drawing hands she's painting hands?" Like, she chose specifically hands, like, which is I don't know, I don't you can't tell. I like going to those painting
oh,
classes.
yeah, are those yours? How
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, like the sip and
Oh, that's
paint
so
or
great.
whatever, and I've got so many there's so many around the whole house, like, of because I just tell people that I'm like, have too many paintings on the house. It's just, even if I'm not very good at it, it's just like they're
It's that
um
focus, getting lost in it. And even though there's a lot of drama in my novel, I think it's character driven. And
yeah,
we
absolutely.
really get into Isabel's head and her interior. That's the real level of drama, is the interior self. We know that what because most of our own struggle is happening inside of us. We're not blurting out to the world that we're sad this
No.
morning, depressed this morning, challenged, happy, joyful,
Yeah.
scared. We're
Yeah.
living it interiorly. And so I think, and yeah, and then there's drama in our lives too. If a child gets really ill and we're afraid they might die, or we have a car accident. Things happen that are very dramatic. But what I'm after when I write is the characters and how they go through some transformation and
Yeah.
come out on the other side. I think that's what the traditional definition of the hero or heroine is. That's the character who has to change, can't
Yeah.
remain static, right? And all of that really happens inside.
Yeah, and that's what you're doing with Isabel. Is she's definitely at war with herself. She's definitely feeling that conflict. She's definitely being pulled into different directions, and she's struggling because she doesn't I don't get the sense that she wants to give up her central, I don't know, what's the nuclear family
Right.
sense that she wants to give that
Yeah.
up because she's very, like, responsible. She's very, "No, I'm in it. This is my family. I, like, love my husband." She's trying, even though she doesn't feel that passion for her husband for a hot second, like, she knows that her husband's different, and she's putting in the work to try to be like, there's a whole plot. There's a whole plot line of a storyline of, her acknowledging that and then her trying to find that back, and I totally respect her for that, and it's yeah, it's exactly, it's like there's that part of her that she's not doesn't wanna separate herself, but that makes her more at war with herself
Right.
because she can't ignore this part, but she's not mad at her obligations. She's what yeah. So one last question before we head out here. What advice sorry, I'm gonna throw this at you. What advice do you have for Isabel? What advice do you have for Nick?
Oh dear. I think that my advice for both of them is the same. And that's what is there's a kind of saying, take the long view. We make a lot of decisions, I think, especially maybe in our 20s, but maybe anytime. Some people in their 40s because they have a life crisis or something. But we get really caught up in something and think we have to make a decision right now, or we have to move in some direction right now. But really, and I think in the US, I think Americans are all about going fast. I think that we can just slow down sometimes and breathe and think, where do I want to be in a decade or 20 years? And what do I want to stick with so that I can get there? And yeah, sometimes we need radical changes in our lives and we make them. But I think I would say take the long view. But that's not pat. That doesn't mean I'm saying y'all just stay married and have a traditional marriage. Believe me, that is not what I'm saying. This is a very feminist novel. It's really about Isabel claiming her right, again, to her soul and to her destiny, right? And if she was running away to marry Nick and go to Nigeria, then she's not going to find her destiny by continuing to run away. She does have to confront, she does have to grapple, and she does have to make decisions. But yeah, I'd say take the long view. I'd say that to everybody, actually.
I was gonna say that's solid
Oh,
advice for all fictional and non-fictional people. Like that's like I'll stick that in my pocket, just keep the long view, keep the big picture in
right.
mind, the long game.
Yeah.
Just keep it's like at the end of the day, it's what you might be mad about or upset about or depressed about today might not remember it in a month or
No,
so.
I've sometimes gone back and read my journal, and I was really sad or depressed or lonely or angry. And I'm like, what was going on? I don't even remember. Or my husband and I'll have a fight. And 2 weeks later we'll say, what was that we got upset about? And we can't remember.
And no, I'm still I'm like in my I'm gonna be 38 soon, and I go to therapy, and even then, when I try to talk about things that I know, like moments that were moments for me, I will straight up tell my therapist, "I don't even remember what the fight was about. I just remember that it fucked me up." It's like yeah, yeah, and it's so true, and that's so normal, and it's so puts things into perspective because it's whatever you think is, like, the end of the world, it's like a year from now, you won't even remember
Yeah,
it. You won't even remember it unless it's, like, such a huge life-changing moment, a loss or something like that. It's like these fights, it's you handle that as it comes along, and then you look at the big picture, though. Like, you look at the big picture. But it's also, is this gonna make or break
right.
things? Is this really that serious? Is it really that it's exactly. So, yes, very solid advice to I was gonna say fictional characters and real
Yeah.
people, absolutely.
On the cover, to
Oh, I haven't so wait, I have my hat.
it's unfortunately it's got a sticker on it, and this is not even the final copy. This is an ARC, but it's such a beautiful book.
I see the copy that I have is an ARC, it doesn't have the sticker on it,
Yeah, well,
but
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
There, that's so much nicer without the sticker. I just wanted
I
everyone to see
know.
it with that bird, red bird, and yeah, it's such a beautiful book. I'm gonna have to go because I have dinner plans.
Oh, no, absolutely, thank you so much for your time, I
Oh,
need to
it's
go
so
too.
nice. I
Um
feel like you're an old friend.
No, thank you so much, I'm so glad you feel so comfortable with me, Elaine Neil Orr, this was such a comfortable conversation, thank you for your
Thank
time and your
you.
flexibility and your authenticity and for sharing your life and your experiences that maybe you had to tap into, and Dancing Woman, that's available now, I recommend it to people who are into historical fiction, women's fiction, it's got anybody who wants to read about a little messy journey with the backdrop of something a little bit bigger, things like that. But thank you. And wherever we can find you online and on social media, I'll make sure to include the links in the show notes and all that good stuff.
Okay,
And if
great.
and when you are writing or working on another project, feel free to reach out. I'd love to chat with you
Oh,
again.
thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And there you go. That was Elaine Neil Orr talking about her book, A Dancing Woman. That book is available now. Check out the show notes where you can find links to purchase the book and where to find Elaine online and on social media. Rate, review, subscribe. Find Cantina Book Club on your favorite social media, YouTube, podcast player, wherever you are looking for recommendations or author interviews. Check out cantinabookclub.com if you ever need more recommendations. I'm always writing reviews on all sorts of genres. And just a friendly reminder that if you do like an author or their work, go ahead and hop on over to Amazon and Goodreads if you can and give them a rating and review. It really does help them out, along with, of course, pre orders and just ordering their books, requesting them for your bookstores and libraries, all that good stuff. And as always, thank you guys so much for listening.